Hi guys, and welcome to episode 1 of the Fence Business podcast / YouTube channel. Like everything else about this podcast and YouTube channel, it's about the business of fencing and how companies can make more money without doing more work by project managing and estimating better. In this episode, we're going to be looking at escalation clauses and what they are, how they work, and how you can use them when you're doing certain kinds of projects. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be jumping right in. Hi, my name's Tamara, and I've been a fence estimator and project manager for 25 years. I've written a book about contract management, and I am the founder of drawfence.com. And I realized that there were a lot of podcasts and YouTube channels out there that are telling people how to do fence projects and how materials work and new installation techniques and stuff like that. But there's very few that are teaching you the nitty-gritty of how construction contracts work and how you can make more money without doing more work. So that's why we started the Fence Business podcast / YouTube channel, brought to you by drawfence.com. And we hope you learn something new from every episode, and we'll see you every Monday. What is an escalation clause? To those who've never worked with these kinds of things and who's never heard that phrase, sounds like a strange thing, but it kind of explains it in the name, in that it is a clause in a contract or in your terms of quotation that allows you to escalate your price over time. So escalation clauses are not that common in contracts, especially if you've been doing small contracts that are finished relatively quickly. You probably haven't encountered an escalation clause yet, but it is something that is very valuable to fence businesses if they're doing longer term contracts, or even if they're taking a break. Sometimes you start in phase 1 of a project and then they'll call you back in phase 2 and phase 3 and so on. And this can carry on for several months or years. And as we know, over time, materials and labor costs and all those things will increase. So an escalation clause is a way for fence companies and other businesses in the construction industry to make sure that they're making a fair amount of money no matter how long a contract carries on for. Where might you find an escalation clause? These kinds of clauses are most common in large-scale fence projects and bids that you might be working on that are anticipated to go on for a long time. So you probably won't find an escalation clause in a contract for a job that you're going to be on site and then off again. But let's say there's a project that you're working on that's going to have multiple phases over the space of a various number of years, or where you're going to be called out to a different job over, let's say, a 3-year contract period or a 5-year contract period, sort of like a standing order kind of quotation or bid. And those are the places that you might expect to find an escalation clause in the conditions of contract. Anywhere where there's a reasonable anticipation that over time you're going to be working over a long period of time, and over that period of time there's going to be an increase in the cost to do the job. So often when you ask to bid on a project, that's one of the big concerns, because if you're going to be doing the job over many months or a year or however long it's going to be, it's very difficult at the start of the project or even at bid stage to calculate an accurate price for the fence for the duration of the project. So that's why on some of the contracts out there where they know it's already going to take 3 years, 5 years, or however long it's going to take, they'll build an escalation clause into the general terms of contract or the specific terms of contract and give fence companies a way to predictably price their materials and labor for future dates. So the next question you might have is, how do you use escalation clauses in progress billing? Now, if you're new to commercial contracting, you might not have worked too much with progress billing, so you might not know how to integrate this kind of thing into your progress billing. So effectively what you'll be doing when you're using an escalation clause is you will be applying a factor of some kind, whether it's a percentage or something else, to the rates that you're allowed to charge at different points in the contract. So in some cases you will simply price for year 1, year 2, year 3 and so on. So whichever year you're in, you'll be using the rates that are applicable to that year. In other cases, it could be tied to something else, because even when you're allowing a percentage over time, the reality of what you're paying for materials and labor might be different to what you've included in the project. A good example would be COVID. If you started a project before COVID and then suddenly the supply chain issues hit and it was so difficult to get anything and prices went through the roof and those kinds of things, even if you had allowed for the average increase over the past 10 years that you've been experiencing, there's a good chance that you wouldn't be covered for those costs. So what you'd normally be using is whatever the escalation price is in your contract, but there are different factors that would apply to that. So that leads us to the next question most people ask about escalation clauses. How much can you increase your price by with an escalation clause? And that's going to vary a lot depending on the contract that you're working with and how things are set up. So like I said, sometimes they'll just say to you, right, we anticipate this job is going to take 5 years to do, so we want a price for materials and labor for these items for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and so on. In other cases, it's tied to the consumer price index or to inflation or something like that. So you would use whatever the percentage is that applies in that case and use that to readjust your prices. There would also be a difference about when you can do that. Sometimes you can only apply escalation at the end of the year or at the end of a fixed period. Other times, according to the contract clause, it's every time you do your billing. So every time you do your billing, you would compare the cost as it currently is at the time of billing to what it was when you bid the project or when the project was awarded, or however the clause is worded. So you do have to, even if you have an escalation clause in your fence bid document, and even if you are making those allowances in your pricing, you do need to pay close attention to how they structure it. So what can you add, when can you claim it, all those kinds of things. Sometimes they might even say that if things haven't changed by more than X amount, then you can't use the escalation clause, so you really do want to read those very carefully. So the last question a lot of people have about escalation clauses is, can you add your own escalation clause to your quote terms? Because obviously if we can increase costs over time and make sure we're covering material and labor costs, it protects our profits on every project. And the truth is, you can add whatever you want to your own terms of quotation, and I'm a big advocate for writing terms on a per quote basis. I know a lot of fence companies like to use a pre-printed sheet of terms that they send with their quotes, but that doesn't always apply to all jobs, and sometimes, like with an escalation clause on a long project, your standard terms and conditions might not cover that. So you can definitely write an escalation clause into your terms of quotation, and you can write something like material and labor costs will be subject to escalation based on the consumer price index, or escalation of 5% for every year that the project continues, or however you want to word it. So you really do need to think about how you're going to be doing the job and what's going to be the best for your company, so you can make sure that you are covering yourself and making sure that you're going to be getting the money that you should be getting.